Every single morning, the K-9 named Hank walked to the far end of the training facility, sat down, and just stared at the same concrete wall. Didn't bark, didn't growl, just stared. Like he was waiting for something or someone. At first, everyone joked about it until the day they finally tore that wall down. And what they found buried behind it shut the entire precinct down for 2 weeks. Before we show you what they uncovered and why this one dog knew something nobody else did, hit that like button, subscribe with the notifications on, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from today. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. It started as nothing, really. Just a glance. Hell, not even that. More like a pause. One of those tiny things you'd never catch unless you were really paying attention. And if there was one thing Officer Rachel Mendez had learned in her 8 years on the force, it was how to pay attention. She first noticed it that Monday, after moving into the new place. Her K-9 partner, Hank, this gorgeous black lab with this weird little golden streak running down his left paw, had stopped mid-kibble, abandoned his breakfast bowl, and just wandered into the living room. Then he sat down, facing the wall. Not the door where someone might knock, not the window where birds might land, just a blank, beige, boring as hell wall. The east wall of the living room, to be exact. Nothing special about it, just a dusty IKEA bookshelf she hadn't bothered to fill yet, and this crooked, ugly as sin landscape painting that the previous owner had left behind. Rachel, still unpacking boxes in the fixer-upper she'd scored for way under market. Red flag number 1, looking back. Figured it was probably just some weird smell. Maybe someone spilled wine years ago. Maybe a squirrel had died in there once. Who knows? Hank sniffed weird stuff all the time. That was literally his job. His nose never really clocked out. But Tuesday? Same damn thing. Same time. Same wall. Halfway through breakfast, his, not hers. Rachel hadn't eaten a proper breakfast since the academy. He just stood up, padded into the living room, and stared at that wall like it owed him money. By Wednesday, it wasn't just a casual look anymore. This was full-on, laser-focused attention. Hank sat ramrod straight, ears twitching slightly, completely still, except for the occasional tremble that ran down his spine. His tail didn't do that happy little sweep it usually did when he was curious. His body was rigid, like when he caught a scent during training and was waiting for her command to pursue. The only thing missing was his alert bark. Rachel crouched beside him, running her hand down his back. She could feel the tension in his muscles. "What's going on in that big brain of yours, buddy?" she asked softly. He didn't even blink. Just kept staring at that same patch of dingy drywall, like it was speaking to him in dog language. She checked for mice, obviously. Nothing. No scratching sounds, no droppings. Not even that musty smell that comes with rodents. She even borrowed a thermal scanner from the evidence tech at the precinct. Technically, for finding heat signatures behind walls during drug raids? But whatever. It showed nothing. Nada, zilch. But every single morning, like clockwork, Hank would plant himself in front of that wall. 10 minutes. No more, no less. After the 5th day, Rachel started to wonder if this was something else entirely. She took him to the vet, a grumpy old guy who'd been treating police dogs longer than Rachel had been alive. No neurological issues, no cataracts forming, no hidden pain making him act weird, just staring. "What happens when you call him away?" the vet asked, peering over his half-moon glasses. "He listens," Rachel replied, scratching behind Hank's ear, but he keeps looking back, like he's torn between obeying me and, I don't know, obeying something else. The vet shrugged those bony shoulders of his. Dogs fixate sometimes, especially working dogs. Might be something he's remembering. They're not as simple as people think. That night, Rachel sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor beside Hank, staring at the wall with him. Her back ached from a 10-hour shift, and her coffee had gone cold beside her. But damned if she wasn't going to figure this out. "What is it, buddy?" she asked aloud, feeling only slightly stupid for having a one-sided conversation with a wall. "What are you seeing that I'm not?" She started knocking, gently at first, then more methodically, moving inch by inch across the surface, listening for, hell, she didn't know what exactly, just something different. And there it was, a spot near the floorboard that sounded off. Not the hollow tap of normal drywall, more like a dull thud, like something was wedged between the studs, dampening the sound. She marked it with a piece of blue painter's tape, then sat back on her heels. Part of her didn't want to start tearing apart her walls over what might just be a weird piece of insulation. The rational, adult part of her brain, the part that had just signed a 30-year mortgage, said to ignore it. But then there was that look on Hank's face, that focus, that certainty. She tried laughing it off, told herself it was just stress getting to her, between pulling double shifts, adjusting to a new neighborhood, and the dull ache that came with living alone after Will had walked out last year. Maybe she was just projecting. But the next morning, Saturday, her first real day off in 2 weeks, Hank didn't just sit and stare. He barked, one sharp, clear bark. Then he looked directly at her, those brown eyes more serious than she'd ever seen them. And Rachel couldn't laugh this off anymore. Rachel couldn't shake the sound of that bark all day. It echoed in her head while she folded laundry, while she finally unpacked the last moving box, while she ran through training drills with Hank in the backyard. That single bark wasn't his usual alert. It was something else, something urgent. In the 8 years she'd had him, from gangly puppy to seasoned K-9 officer, Hank had never barked indoors unless there was serious trouble. He didn't bark at delivery people. He didn't bark at the TV. The only time he made noise inside was when something was genuinely wrong. She tried to focus on normal weekend stuff, filed that stack of reports she'd brought home, swept the perpetual dog hair off her hardwood floors, walked Hank through some narcotics detection refreshers in the yard, hiding training scents in old tennis balls for him to find. He performed flawlessly, focused, quick, efficient. But in the back of her mind, all she could see was him sitting in front of that damn wall, his eyes burning with some message he couldn't find the words for. That evening, she sat on the living room floor with a flashlight she'd dug out of her emergency kit. She tapped again, slower this time, more methodical, listening carefully for changes in the sound. She mapped out a section about 2 feet wide where the wall sounded different, thicker somehow, like someone had sealed something inside. Her laptop balanced on her knees. She pulled up the property records she'd requested. Being a cop sometimes had its perks. The house had been built in 1952. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, nothing fancy, nothing weird, until she found the original blueprints. There was supposed to be a narrow storage recess between those wall studs, a built-in broom closet that had been part of the original design. But in the updated plans from 1999, that space just vanished, sealed up, erased, deliberately hidden. That's when her stomach twisted into a knot. At 10:42 p.m., after staring at the ceiling for an hour, she finally texted her supervisor, Martinez, "Need a consult. Something weird at my new place. Possible structural concealment. Not an emergency, but might be worth looking at." His reply came faster than she expected for a Saturday night. "Everything okay? Want me to send someone by?" Rachel hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't want to look like an idiot if this turned out to be nothing. "Not yet. Let me check myself first. Probably just an old wall modification. Will call if it's serious." She stared at the wall a while longer, Hank curled against her side. His body was relaxed, but his eyes were still open, watching the wall, even in the dim glow of her reading lamp. "Screw it," she muttered, pulling herself up and slipping on an old academy hoodie. She grabbed her small pry bar from the garage toolbox. Not enough to demolish a wall, just enough to peek. "All right, buddy," she whispered, kneeling beside Hank. "Let's see what you've been trying to tell me." She scored a line in the paint first, following what looked like a seam. Found the edge of what had once been a wooden access panel. Then gave the pry bar a gentle pull. The wall didn't crumble or crack like she'd feared. It gave. The plywood shifted with a low groan that sent a shiver down her spine, releasing a puff of ancient dust that made her cough. She pulled out her flashlight, steadied her breathing, and shone the beam into the dark space behind. It was mostly empty, except for one thing. Tucked into the far corner of the recess sat a small metal lockbox. Not new, not fancy. Old, rusted at the edges. The kind of thing people keep important papers in, or maybe emergency cash. It was wedged awkwardly between pink insulation, its handle barely visible through years of accumulated dust and cobwebs. Rachel froze. Hank stood. Neither of them moved. Rachel forced herself to take a slow breath, then leaned forward and carefully pulled the box free. It was heavier than it looked, cold to the touch even through her gloves. Something inside shifted, with a soft metallic sound when she tilted it. She turned to look at Hank. He stared at the box, then back at her. No tail wag, no bark, just that intense, unblinking gaze that seemed to say, "This is what I've been waiting for." Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The metal box sat on Rachel's kitchen table like some kind of warning. Old, battered, with streaks of rust creeping out from the hinges, it felt unnaturally cold, like it had absorbed decades of darkness while waiting for someone to find it. She didn't touch it at first, just circled the table slowly. Flashlight beam tracing over the dents and scratches in its surface. Every cop instinct she'd developed over the years told her this wasn't some forgotten treasure, chest full of love letters or family photos. Hank sat at her feet, ears perked forward, alert but calmer now. He wasn't sniffing frantically. He wasn't pawing at the box. He was just watching, waiting. Rachel finally pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, old habits from crime scene processing, and knelt beside it. The box wasn't padlocked or combination sealed, just a simple latch that had partially fused with rust over the years. It took some work with a flathead screwdriver to break it loose, the metal protesting with a high-pitched screech that made her wince. Inside were two things. The first was a worn manila envelope, thick with paper, corners curled with age and exposure to moisture. The second was a child's drawing, faded crayon scribbles on yellowing construction paper, a stick figure holding hands with a dog, a lopsided sun in the corner, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, and in wobbly, uncertain letters, "Me and Gus." Rachel stared at it longer than she meant to, something twisting in her chest. The envelope came next. What she found inside made her blood run cold. Documents, all dated between 1997 and 2000. Police reports, not from her department, but from a county 30 miles north. Foster care intake forms, a signed confession statement, the handwriting so shaky it was barely legible. Photos, one showing a young boy with bruises mottling his face and arms, maybe 6 or 7 years old, his expression hauntingly vacant. Another photo, a mugshot of a middle-aged man with bloodshot eyes and a red mark blooming across his jawline. Handwritten case notes from someone identified as a child welfare worker. A name, Marcus Lowell, circled multiple times in angry red ink. Another name, Jude, scribbled on a yellow post-it beside the word witness. Rachel flipped through the papers faster now, her heart hammering. It read like a case file that had somehow never made it into official records. Child abuse, severe neglect, emergency removal order. But the documentation ended abruptly without resolution. No court judgment, no placement record, no follow-up. The last document was a hastily written note on lined notebook paper. If you're reading this, something went wrong. Gus always knew. Trust him. Gus. Rachel glanced back at the child's drawing. Me and Gus. She slowly turned toward Hank, who sat perfectly still, tail curled tightly around his feet. You've seen this before, she whispered. He blinked once, then lowered his head with a soft, mournful whine that raised the hair on the back of her neck. Rachel sank back in her chair, mind racing to make connections that seemed impossible. Hank wasn't reacting to some random spot in the wall. He was reacting to the memory hidden behind it. She picked up the photo of the bruised boy again, studying his hollow eyes. The date stamped on the back, June 17th, 1999. Gus, she murmured. You're not Hank, are you? There was no logical way this made sense. Hank had been microchipped, registered, evaluated, and placed through the proper K9 program channels. His records were impeccable, but looking at him now with fresh eyes, Rachel noticed things she'd always attributed to his training. The cautious way he approached strange men, how he positioned himself between her and drunk guys during bar fights, the gentle way he nudged children who seemed afraid. This wasn't just training or temperament. This was memory. And what if Hank hadn't just been found as a stray behind that abandoned gas station 5 years ago, like the K9 unit believed? What if he'd remembered something no one else could? She grabbed her phone and texted Riley, the one detective at the precinct who wouldn't think she was crazy. Found something weird. Not emergency weird, but you'll want to see this. The reply came almost immediately. You okay? Trouble? Yeah, I'm fine. But this dog? I think he's carrying someone else's secrets. She set the phone down and ran her hands over her face, suddenly exhausted. Hank rested his chin on her knee, his eyes never leaving hers. You remembered what everyone else forgot, she said softly, running her fingers through the fur between his ears. And you waited for someone to care enough to look. Hank didn't move, just stayed with her as the kitchen clock ticked past midnight. The box of forgotten horrors opened between them. Rachel didn't know who Jude was, or what had happened to make the child in those files disappear. But she knew now that she was holding evidence of something that had been deliberately buried, and that Hank had been trying to unearth it, morning after morning, with a patience that broke her heart. She wouldn't ignore him again. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the precinct an hour early, operating on 2 espresso shots and maybe 40 minutes of broken sleep. The file had haunted her all night, especially that final scrawled note. If you're reading this, something went wrong. Gus always knew. She had those words burned into her memory now. The child's crayon drawing was folded carefully in her jacket pocket, like a promise she couldn't quite explain. Hank padded beside her through the side entrance without his usual leash. Just silent companionship after so many years together. Nobody bothered to stop them anymore. Everyone in the building knew the wall dog. The partner who'd saved Rachel's life twice during drug raids, gone bad. But none of them knew what he'd been trying to say all these weeks. Detective Riley was already at her desk, halfway through a blueberry muffin and scrolling through case files with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked up when Rachel walked in, eyebrow raised, in that way that meant she was intrigued but skeptical. "So," she said, brushing crumbs from her blazer, "you want to explain why your not-so-little friend was tunneling through drywall last night?" Rachel didn't bother with small talk. She just laid the battered manila envelope on Riley's cluttered desk. This was sealed into the wall behind the spot Hank kept staring at. I think he remembered it somehow. Or at least remembered the scent of it. There's no other explanation. Riley flipped the envelope open, and her expression changed almost instantly. Professional curiosity hardening into concern as she scanned the documents. Is this authentic? Every page looks genuine to me. Photos have the right paper age. Caseworkers' notes are consistent with protocols from that era. The signature on the confession form matches other documents. Marcus Lowell's the abuser. Child's name is Jude, no last name listed. All from 1997 to 2000. Riley paused at the photograph of the bruised boy, her mouth tightening. Why wasn't this entered into the system? These kinds of records don't just vanish. I think someone wanted it buried, Rachel said quietly. And if they went to these lengths, maybe they had help. The kind of help that can make evidence disappear when it's inconvenient. Riley nodded grimly, understanding immediately. They'd both seen cases like this before, where money or connections made justice evaporate. So this isn't just a cold abuse case, it's potentially corruption. Rachel tapped the mugshot of Lowell. He pled guilty, according to these papers. Signed statements right there. But all the follow-up documentation is missing. No record of what happened to Jude afterward. No court docket numbers. And here's the kicker. Marcus Lowell's last known address. The previous owner of my house. You think the boy lived there? I think he might have died there, Rachel said, the words heavy in her mouth. Or maybe he escaped. Either way, Hank or Gus, whatever his name used to be, never left that spot. He stared at that wall every morning for weeks, until someone finally listened. Riley looked up, eyebrows drawn together. You seriously believe it's the same dog? After all these years? Rachel exhaled slowly. I think Gus was who Hank used to be. I think he waited all this time for someone like me to show up, and now he's trying to tell us what really happened. Riley didn't laugh or dismiss the theory. She'd worked too many strange cases to rule anything out completely. She just studied Hank for a long moment, taking in his calm, watchful demeanor. Let's run this through forensics, she said finally, tapping the envelope, and contact records. Pull everything they have on Marcus Lowell, arrest history, release documentation, property records. The works. I'll check with Child Services, see if Jude ever showed up in the system under a different name. Rachel hesitated. What about the wall? There's more space back there that we didn't search. Hank keeps sniffing at the corner section, specifically. Riley sighed, grabbed her jacket off the back of her chair, and drained the last of her coffee. Then we go back right now, before someone decides this isn't worth pursuing. 2 hours later, they were back at Rachel's house, armed with gloves, dust masks, and a portable LED work light Riley had grabbed from the evidence processing room. Rachel's hands weren't quite steady as she used the pry bar to remove more of the drywall, ancient dust and crumbling joint compound, filling the air with a musty, forgotten smell. Hank stayed just behind them, not barking or whining, but watching intently. When they found the second hidden compartment, Riley went completely still. This one was smaller, just a hollow about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in disintegrating plastic sheeting. Inside was a mold-spotted photo album, sealed in a Ziploc bag, a small toy truck with teeth marks in the plastic wheels, and a child's sweater, still folded neatly, despite the years. Its blue and red stripes, faded, but recognizable. Riley stared at the items, then slowly lowered her hands to her sides. "These aren't just old belongings," she whispered, her voice tight. "These are keepsakes, the kind you hide when you think someone might come and take them away." Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He was trying to save something. Someone. While Riley carefully photographed each item in situ with her phone, Hank moved forward and settled directly in front of the sweater. He placed one paw on it, so gently it barely disturbed the fabric. Rachel felt her throat constrict. He remembers this. He remembers all of it. For the first time since Rachel had known her, Riley didn't maintain her professional skepticism. She just looked stunned. "We need a full forensics team in here," she said quietly. "DNA, fiber analysis, everything we can get. And we need to figure out what happened to Marcus Lowell." Rachel's voice dropped to match Riley's hushed tone. "That's the part I already checked last night." Riley looked up, questioning. "Lowell disappeared in 2001. Never showed up for his final sentencing hearing. Declared legally dead 7 years later. But no body was ever found." They stood in the dusty silence of Rachel's living room, the weight of 2 decades pressing down around them. And at their feet, Hank, or Gus, lay beside the faded sweater, his eyes half closed but watchful, like he'd finally completed a vigil that had lasted longer than anyone could have imagined. The world never heard about what Hank found sealed in that wall. There was no press conference, no viral social media post, no morning news segment, no awards ceremony or special commendation, just a plain cardboard evidence box, carefully labeled and handed to the state medical examiner, and a cold case file that finally saw daylight after 20 lonely years. The blue and red striped sweater tested positive for DNA, a perfect match to a partial profile stored in a juvenile medical record labeled simply Jude M. from 1998. The record showed treatment for a fractured wrist, noted as a playground accident. But the x-rays told a different story, a spiral fracture consistent with someone twisting the child's arm. The photo album revealed more, snapshots of a solemn-faced boy with those same hollow eyes they'd seen in the case file, and a black dog with the distinctive golden streak on its paw, curled protectively at the child's side. They never found Jude's body. But Rachel didn't think they needed to. That hidden space in the wall hadn't been a grave. It had been a time capsule, a shrine, a desperate attempt to preserve evidence of someone's existence before the rest of the world could pretend they'd never been there at all. Marcus Lowell remained a ghost. His name never popped up in any system, any passport control, any housing registry. Some speculated he'd fled the country. Others whispered that maybe someone had discovered what he'd done to that boy and decided the courts weren't moving fast enough. Either way, no one was actively looking for him anymore. 3 weeks later, Rachel stood off to the side of the K-9 training field, collar of her jacket turned up against the sharp wind that cut across the open space. Hank sat beside her, tongue lolling slightly, ears relaxed for what felt like the first time in months. The other K9 teams were running their usual drills, scent detection, bite work, obedience certification. But Rachel and Hank were just observers today. Technically, as of yesterday, Hank had retired. It wasn't a big ceremony or anything. She'd filed the paperwork quietly, citing behavioral considerations for specialized placement. He'd passed every physical and aptitude test they'd thrown at him. He was still one of the best in the unit. But Rachel knew the truth, that nobody else would understand. He wasn't like the others. He never had been. And now, finally, he didn't have to pretend anymore. Riley approached from the equipment shed, bundled in her favorite ancient leather jacket, a steaming travel mug in one hand, and a thick folder tucked under her arm. "Heard you put in for the transfer," she said without preamble, squinting against the wind. Rachel nodded, watching a young shepherd race through an obstacle course. "Yeah, I'm done pretending he's just another K9 unit. He's not. He's got his own story." Riley handed over the folder. Inside were copies of everything they'd compiled on Jude's case, now officially classified as probable victim, status unknown. Rachel flipped through the latest documentation, stopping at a single line highlighted in yellow. Investigation reopened based on evidence recovery initiated by animal behavior alerts. No credible human witness testimony available. Riley watched her read it. "They mean he solved it," she said simply. "They just don't know how to write that in a report without sounding crazy." Rachel smiled, faintly. "That makes two of us." They stood in companionable silence, watching the younger handlers work with their eager, by-the-book partners. Young labs racing after tennis balls laced with training sense, Malinois bristling at the sight of bite sleeves, commands and rewards and checklists, and Hank stretched out at Rachel's feet, like none of it had anything to do with him anymore. "Taking him home for good?" Riley asked, though she clearly knew the answer. Rachel looked down at the dog who'd changed everything. "He chose me before I even knew why. I'm just making it official." "Good," Riley said, nodding once. "He deserves that much." They shared a look that didn't need more words, not after everything they'd uncovered together. That night, for the first time, Rachel let Hank on the couch without even a token protest. He settled in beside her, head resting against her leg, eyes half closed in contentment. On the coffee table sat the only thing she'd kept from the wall. That child's crayon, drawing in its protective sleeve. It showed a little boy, a house, and a dog with a golden paw. In the corner, in those unsteady block letters, was a single name. U.S. Rachel looked down at the sleeping dog pressed against her side. "Whatever your name was back then," she whispered, fingers gently stroking the golden streak on his paw. "You never gave up, did you?" He didn't stir, just let out one deep, contented sigh. And for the first time in his life, however long it had really been, he didn't need to keep watch anymore. He was home. Have you ever seen a dog act strange? Like they were trying to tell you something no one else could see? Maybe pacing in front of a door right before someone showed up, or staring into a corner where nothing seemed to be. What would you have done if your dog kept focusing on the same spot day after day? Would you have written it off as nothing, or would you have torn down a wall to find out? And here's the real question. Do you believe animals carry memories that humans try to forget? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your stories about the unexplainable things your pets have done. If this story hit you in the feels, hit that like button. It helps our channel reach more people who believe in the quiet heroism of animals just trying to be heard. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. We share powerful canine stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. And if you know someone who still thinks dogs are just animals, share this with them. Because sometimes the ones who can't speak are the ones who remember the loudest. 2 more incredible K9 stories are appearing on your screen right now. Click either one to watch next, and I'll catch you tomorrow with another story that might just leave you speechless. Stay safe out there, folks. And maybe listen a little closer to what your dog is trying to tell you.